It is the Doomsday Podcast, and for a lot of Cowboys fans, very fitting term, and who knows what will become of this defense. But Ed, the unthinkable has happened. At around 4 o'clock, news comes down that Micah Parsons has been traded to the Green Bay Packers in exchange for 2 first-round picks. We soon find out Kenny Clark, also a defensive tackle in his late 20s, who's been a pretty good player. But just shocking news on top of Ed, the Metroplex already having gone through an enormous trade with Luka. I think people are shell-shocked, and I think even the people, Ed, that were kind of like, I'm done with this. Why don't you just trade him? I even think those people are like, wait a second. We didn't really think they would do it. And yet, Ed, it has happened, and the Cowboys have made the trade. And Jerry Jones has, again, I mean, this is extremely rare when you take arguably, maybe not even arguably, your best player in his prime and you trade him away.
Well, we have to keep in mind that this contract dispute has been going on for more than a year, because Micah Parsons said during training camp in Oxnard that he and his agent David Mulugheta had approached the Cowboys a year ago and asked about doing an extension, and they declined, citing, they felt like they had to get Dak Prescott and Micah Parsons done. That was the priority. But at that training camp, we sat down with Stephen Jones, and he said their goal was to sign all 3 of these players, that they envisioned that being the way that they were going to return to prominence and win a championship again. And now, all this time later, with seemingly no negotiations ever happening between general manager and owner Jerry Jones and David Mulugheta, Micah Parsons, a generational pass rusher, is not only traded, and he's traded to me at the wrong time to maximize his value. First of all, 7 days before you open the season on the road against the defending world champion Eagles is not the time to be acquiring draft picks and a defensive tackle for an elite edge rusher. But you've also traded him to the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers are the team responsible 2 years ago for inflicting upon you arguably the worst playoff defeat in the history of the Cowboys franchise. Remember, the Cowboys had won 16 consecutive home games. They get blown out by the Packers. So Micah Parsons now, you could argue, could be to Dallas what Charles Haley was all those years ago when the 49ers traded him to the Cowboys. He could be the missing link for Green Bay to enjoy Super Bowl success again. Jerry Jones said back then in the 90s, we couldn't spell Super Bowl without Charles Haley. Well, the pass rusher is really what Green Bay's been missing. And you compete with Green Bay for an NFC playoff berth. You play Green Bay in week 4 on Sunday Night Football in your stadium. Micah Parsons is now going to try to be inflicting damage on Dak Prescott.
Wow. It is shocking. And Ed, I think a lot of us were wondering if Goose Goslin might slip in there next to you.
You referenced the Jerry Jones Netflix doc
that we've been watching you on, but here you are with us, looking young, I might add. I want to read just a little bit of because Micah, this suggests that. So they've been working on this deal all week, and they have, of course, the Cowboys couldn't get a deal done with Micah, even though Jerry thought he had a deal done with him, and they end up getting a deal done. And Ed, you have the particulars in front of you, but $47 million a year. We knew it was going to be a monster because T.J. Watt and others had reset the market, and that T.J. Watt contract was $41 million a year. This contract really blows that one out of the water, and so Green Bay swoops in, gets Micah Parsons, and the 2 first-round picks, just for the record, one in 2026, one in 2027, and they get the player, as Ed talked about, 29-year-old defensive tackle. Good player, but he's not Micah Parsons. He's got 36 sacks in his career. How many does Micah have?
I think he has like 52 and a half, Micah Parsons does, in 4 years. If you look at the Cowboys roster construction under new defensive coordinator Matt Eberflus, who's their 3rd defensive coordinator in as many years. I think they stockpiled edge rushers. I think they're well suited at that position to absorb the loss of Micah Parsons, even though they don't have anybody like Micah who, opponents game plan against to start every week. They don't have that player anymore. But they do have, Donovan Izaraku that they drafted in the second round, Dante Fowler. They have Sam Williams coming back from an injury. Peyton Turner, they acquired, a former first-round pick. What they were concerned about, and I think that's reflected here, is their interior defensive line. Lack of size to stop the run.
Yeah.
And they obviously made a priority of signing Oso Digizua as a defensive tackle and a 3 technique in this defense. But other than Mozzie Smith, they didn't really have a 1 technique, a true nose tackle, and that's what Kenny Clark is. He is a 3-time Pro Bowler. He's going to turn 30 in October. He was one of only 4 Packers who were 29 years or older. He's played 140 games, 126 starts over 9 years with the Packers, coming into the league as a 27th overall pick in 2016 Dak's draft year. He had a career high in sacks of 7.5 in 2023, a total that fell to 1 in 17 starts last year. Parsons, of course, had 9 sacks in just the last 7 games of the season. So the Cowboys are investing in defensive tackle here at the expense of losing one of the elite edge rushers in the game and a very young player. I mean, he's by far the best young edge rusher in football. You look at Watt and Max Crosby and Myles Garrett, they're all 5 or more years older, than Micah Parsons.
All right, and let's not – I mean, how big a role did last Friday play in this? Let me just say this. It pissed a lot of people off in the organization. And does that trump all the good and all the amazing things he can do as a player? No, it should not. But let's be upfront about the fact that him lounging around and appearing to fall asleep on a trainer's table during a preseason game while, he had some of his teammates out there trying to fight for their jobs and position, pissed a ton of people off, including this head coach. And the head coach said, I am going to talk to him about that. He did that earlier this week. But, boy, you talk about, not only did it not calm things down, it only kind of lit a match to some of the frustration the teams had with him at times. Ed, we were out there. We watched a little bit of it. They didn't like that he showed up one day without a jersey on. They convinced him to put his jersey on for one practice. He was leaving town last night, according to photos, to go get a second opinion on a back injury that we don't know, how big of a back injury that. And it's funny how these trades always happen, don't they? Something tells me that he'll be shot out of a cannon in week 1 for the Green Bay Packers.
Yeah, I hope he passes his physical in Green Bay so that this trade is officially consummated, because I thought we were headed for a showdown on the practice field tomorrow, because on Tuesday, Brian Schottenheimer, the head coach, said that they had an MRI on his back, that he was cleared medically to resume practices, which meant if you're not on the practice field, you're subject to discipline and the potential of, losing your salary and being suspended. And so Micah Parsons' next move was, okay, then I'll go get a conflicting second opinion that justifies me continuing to miss practices and potentially games and get paid while I'm doing so. So this was turning into a bad situation, and ultimately this is, why the Cowboys decided to move on.
As a man who witnessed, and you've been talking about it on this Netflix thing, when people say, well, the Cowboys hoped it's like a Herschel Walker trade. First of all, there were so many picks involved in that, and then you could cut all these players, and that turned into picks. So it's not an apples to apples thing. The only thing you could bring up is you did get 2 first-round picks. That's usually reserved for a starting quarterback type player. Again, as you said, he had more value before the draft. This is a strange time to try to get a deal done. And I think the only really true thing we had to match this up with was that Khalil Mack trade that the Bears made. And I'm trying to think what happened in that one, Ed. You probably know off the top of your head how closely this one is to that one. The Khalil Mack was were there a couple of first-round picks, weren't there?
In 2018, the Bears traded for Khalil Mack from the Raiders, made him the highest paid defensive player in the NFL. And now that was at $23.5 million. Now Micah Parsons gets this deal for $47 million. But yeah, I think that also involved 2 first-round picks and some later picks going back and forth between the two teams. But Micah Parsons, let's not underestimate, what he did. I think we saw last year when he missed those 4 games, the difference he made in the defense upon his return. I mean, they won 12 games 3 years in a row under Mike McCarthy, partly because Dan Quinn established a defense that could rush the passer and create takeaways like no other team in football. Now, it resulted in no playoff success, and Green Bay was part of that, but it created an identity on defense, and Micah Parsons was the main driver of that. And he's led the NFL in 3 of his 4 seasons in terms of pass rush win rate. 3 times he led the NFL in that category, which is beating your block within 2.5 seconds. And the other time he finished second, and that was last year when he was, he was limited because of the ankle injury, he missed some time and so forth. But he's always been top 2. He's been, in the top 3 for Defensive Player of the Year voting 3 times. This is an elite player, and, it's certainly one I think the Cowboys ultimately could come to regret. Not only losing the player, but where they're sending him is the part that troubles me the most.
You said the game that was so horrible, the horrible loss just a couple of years ago. Think about 2014, the Packers have been a team, in the past decade that the Cowboys have had trouble getting past. Aaron Rodgers was some part of that. Jordan Love was part of this last one. And so, this team that they've had so much trouble getting past and almost got to an NFC title game against with the catch, no catch thing in Lambeau. I mean, my gosh, it is amazing that's who they end up doing this deal with. And by the way, I wanted to read this one little part from Micah. This is the most important thing of what he said. I never wanted this chapter to end, but not everything was in my control. My heart has always been here, and it still is. Through it all, I never made any demands. I never asked for anything more than fairness. He asked for a trade. I only asked that the person I trust to negotiate my contract be part of the process.
Seems like a fair expectation.
Yeah. And again, Jerry thought, hey, he's here. I think we got the parameters of a deal. Let's just do this thing. And Jerry he ended up later, obviously alienating the player in a heartbeat because in a sense, he kind of made Micah look bad. It made Micah look like he didn't know what he was doing and that Jerry had taken advantage of him. And then so the agent had to come back and then he disrespected the agent. And what the agent turned around and just did some massive deal with Green Bay. All right. I mean, the biggest deal in the history for non-quarterbacks. Well, and nothing is close.
Yeah, I think everybody thought, remember Jerry early in camp said, the trade request, that was just a negotiating tactic. Don't lose any sleep over this is what he told fans. And I think for the most part, people believe that ultimately this would get resolved and that Micah would win. And you can argue whether he did or he didn't win today. He's not playing for the franchise that he said he wanted to spend his career with. We talked about being a Troy Aikman, a Roger Staubach, a Bob Lilly, a player who spent his entire career with the Cowboys and his number was never worn again, and that sort of thing by another future Cowboys player. But, with what happened with Dak last year, signing, the day of the game, the season opener, with Zeke, holding out in Cabo and signing 4 days before the regular season opener and playing in the game, I think there was just always this expectation that this was going to end the same way. And for whatever reason, Jerry obviously was indignant about the fact that he felt Micah had essentially agreed man-to-man handshake deal that was for 5 years. That's what Jerry wanted, 5 years. CD signed for 4. Dak signed for 4. He thought he had Micah for 5. That was the crux of the whole thing. And this, I think, ultimately, after all the times Jerry lost to Dak, Jerry lost to Zach Martin, Jerry lost to CeeDee Lamb, he lost to Zeke, I think this was the one where Jerry said, I'm winning this one. I have the leverage and I'm going to win this negotiation. I think today they're potentially the big loser.
That's the way it comes across, and I think the Packers are going to get a lot of credit for being extremely aggressive. Same thing with the Rams. The Rams, get that F them picks reputation, and I guess now the Packers are going to look at that, which is interesting over the years when you think about their history and everything. And one last thing, and we need to get you out, and I may race out there too to this press conference as we tape this tonight. How do you think this is going to play with Cowboys fans? Because I was hearing from fans that were kind of getting fed up with Micah, and sometimes I would hear them say, just trade him, get rid of him. And there was some of that sentiment out there. Now that it's actually happened, it'll be interesting to me to see how much backlash Jerry feels, or if the kind of fans that love and obsess about the draft think, oh, man, look at all these draft picks that the Cowboys are going to end up having. They're going to have 4 first-rounders over the next couple of years. How do you think this thing's going to play? We'll hear from Jerry in a little bit, but how do you think this is going to play with fans?
Well, I think there certainly is a faction of the fan base that was done with Micah Parsons, felt like he'd taken this thing too far, was wanted too much in terms of salary, that he handled the thing poorly, partly because of what you said about the body language, laying on the training table during a game. That was disrespectful to everybody involved. But I think the far greater population among Cowboy fans has despised Jerry as a general manager for 30 years. And the overwhelming takeaway is going to be what a bad general manager, Jerry Jones is. And I think the bigger concern, forget what the public thinks, is how does this affect the locker room? How is this perceived in the locker room 7 days before you go to Philadelphia and play the Philadelphia Eagles to start the entire NFL season? You're playing the best team in football, and now you don't have at least your best defensive player. I didn't think Jerry would make this move because I thought it would be perceived as giving up on the season before it started. And I wonder if that will be a prevailing sentiment early in this season from the Cowboys locker room that becomes evident in the way they perform on the field. And also, I say that recognizing Micah Parsons has never been the most popular player in the Cowboys facility. Like, there are a lot of people out there who think he's selfish, who think he doesn't buy into the defensive scheme and does his own thing, just wants sacks, isn't a real leader. Jerry openly questioned his leadership qualities when they started talking about signing him. So what he said about Mike McCarthy, last year, describing him as lazy, those were all negative things about Micah Parsons. And so not everybody in the building is going to defend him. And some people will no doubt be glad he's gone. But I still think you look at this as a player, you look at this as Dak Prescott or CeeDee Lamb, and you're like, oh my God, I thought, all this offseason we had done things to make our roster better and give ourselves a chance to make a run at the division. And instead, we're half a football team already. Wow.
It is remarkable. All right, we got a press conference to attend. And Ed, if you have any contacts with Netflix from the documentary you were a part of, let them see what we just did. I could see maybe a bonus episode. I know Kalishaw tried to kind of write some additional things the other day, maybe hoping he could squeeze his way on. But this was quite a day, quite an afternoon. This goes down at 4:00 this afternoon. Micah Parsons, no longer a part of the organization, has been traded for 2 first-round picks and Kenny Clark, a defensive tackle, a 29-year-old defensive tackle. This is not Herschel Walker. These are not 5 players coming back that you can cut and get picks for everybody. And so this is fascinating. And so let's go talk to Jerry. And then, Ed, if you'll call Jimmy and get Jimmy's take on this as well.
I'm on it.
All right, there he is, Ed Werder, famous for his recent appearance on the Netflix Jerry the Gambler and his Cowboys. He's gambled again. It is the Doomsday Podcast for Ed Werder and the Z-Man. I am Matt Mosley. Good night.
We are Rogue Media Sports.